Now, your heading tonight is Everyday Life, and Everyday Life is part of the listing under sources. So syllabus part 1, for you, examinable part, was geographic, environment, resources, towns and streetscapes. Streetscapes and, yeah. Part 2 is called sources, and then under sources, there are a huge list of topics. You've already done eruption, economy, society, politics. So you've done 4. And Everyday Life is the 5th of the listing. So your heading is Everyday Life. Now, what you can see is that Everyday Life has a number of subsections. Leisure activities, food and dining, clothing, health, baths, water supply and sanitation. And so the first one we're going to start with is leisure activities in a moment. Now I've devoted this week to this whole syllabus .5 under sources. Just a reminder that in the exam, parts 1 and 2, that's the geographic, environment and streetscapes, and 2, the sources, and all of these listings, are examined in the multiple choice and short answer. Part B, the 10 marker, examines the 3rd syllabus section, which is all about archaeology. So there is a separate revision recording already on the revision listing just for archaeology, and I'm running you through that in the 3 tests, last week's 2 and this week's 1. So this week's test has got the ethics of archaeology in it, I think, from memory. Anyway, to begin, leisure activities. So here is a listing of the public buildings devoted to leisure activities. So I'm going to divide leisure activities into leisure activities in public venues and leisure activities that are in the inns and brothels. So in public venues, both Pompeii and Herculaneum contained a theatre for drama performances. In addition, Pompeii had a smaller theatre which is called an Odeon for musical performances and poetry. Now you can be asked a multiple choice about what the Odeon was used for, so distinguish between the larger theatre for drama performances and the Odeon at Pompeii, which was a larger settlement and could have this building for musical performances. Pompeii also had a very large amphitheatre, and even though Herculaneum hasn't been fully excavated, it won't have an amphitheatre, because an amphitheatre is a very large regional public venue for gladiatorial games. So that amphitheatre could sit up to 20,000 people, I think maybe even more. We'll come to that and find out in a moment. Now, in addition, at Pompeii and at Herculaneum, there was a palestra. Now that can be spelled P-A-L-A-E-S-T-R-A-S, or as you can see there with just the E, palestra. Now a palestra is an exercise yard, and the palestra at Pompeii was very large. The palestra at Herculaneum was much smaller and was just beside a huge pool, also for use for public bathing. So a palestra is a originally a Greek concept, an exercise yard for running and wrestling, for example. Town baths, which are under health in this case, but could be leisure activities as well. But town baths, the largest town baths, also had a little exercise yard, a small palestra and pool associated with them. So you got your 4 listed. Let's have a little look at these. And here you can see some of those buildings that I mentioned. So here's the entrance, the staircase up to the amphitheatre at Pompeii. Here's the inside of the theatre of Pompeii, the baths at Herculaneum, and the portico of the great big exercise yard, or the great palestra of Pompeii. So the theatre first of all. The theatre at Pompeii, as I've said before, was a very large theatre compared to that at Herculaneum. It seated around about 5,000 people, and it was intended for theatrical performances. Okay, so when did they have these theatrical performances? Quite regularly as part of religious festivities in particular. So that's kind of like borrowed from the Greeks as well. And this theatre, and that previous slide, hang on while I just get the previous slide back up. Got to find it, got to find it. Here we are. That previous slide showed you the inside of the theatre. Now, that theatre is actually freestanding, unlike a Greek one, but it's built upwards to look like it's a hill. But it's actually not a hill, it's freestanding. All right, and so over the seats here, originally, there was an awning. All right, so what did they watch? They watched tragedies and they watched comedies. And they were Roman tragedies and comedies as well as the Greek ones, because the Romans borrowed the Greek idea of theatrical performances and then wrote a considerable number themselves. The other thing to notice about the theatre is that the elite social class sat in the front rows, and then the women at the back. So those decurion from last week, those members of the town council and the duumviri and the aediles, they would be in the front rows because they're the very important people of the town, women at the back. There's some evidence of theatrical performances or a liking for theatrical performances, and here are two mosaics from different houses. There's also a mosaic from the House of the Faun, which I don't have here, I don't think, and it shows masks. So here you've got some gossips in a comedy. This is a mosaic from a house in Herculaneum called the House of the Tragic Poet, just for the want of a name. And here you've got a tragic mask, which is why it's called the Tragic Poet. So these masks are all masks for performance of tragedies. And this mosaic shows these performers getting ready for a performance in the theatre. The theatre itself was built and refurbished as part of that political patronage practice that characterised Roman and provincial politics. So there's a theatre from Pompeii. Herculaneum also has an excavated theatre. Well, it's not actually excavated. The original tunnels were radiated from that theatre. So the theatre is in the unexcavated part, but it's known because of the tunnelings. And actually, Herculaneum's excavation began when a farmer was digging a well, and the digging down, he just came to the open space of part of the theatre. And that's the start of the excavations of Herculaneum in the treasure-seeking part of its history. So Herculaneum and Pompeii both had theatres for drama performance. You've seen something of the mosaics that also are part of the evidence for this kind of performance. Now, the small theatre, or Odeon, is right next to the big theatre in Pompeii. And this is a roofed theatre, whereas the other one just had an awning and basically was unroofed. This one, this small one, had a roof, so it's a building like you would go into a lecture theatre in a university. So it's got the tiered seating. a stage at the front, and it was for musical performances. Also for poetry reading. Now let me just see if I've got, yes I do. So here are some of the finds of musical instruments found in Herculaneum, and you can also see in this little fresco of the beginning of the gladiatorial games that this horn rather, a cornuta, is being used to kick off the games. So the Odeon is a concert hall. You could write concert hall for the Odeon. So they're going to go to musical concerts, to poetry reading, and they might even go to lectures. All right, so what was the difference between the Herculaneum Theatre and the Pompey one? Well, the Pompey one was built to look like it was in a hill slope. So it tucked into a hill slope. They built up the hill a bit, whereas the Herculaneum one was Roman style, just freestanding. And it was the Herculaneum Theatre that has an inscription about a duumvir actually refurbishing that theatre. So you can put Herculaneum inscription, architectural patronage by the duumvir. His name was Rufus. Now our next building is easy. It's the amphitheatre, and you already know that an amphitheatre was a large oval, and it was tiered, and it was a venue for public games, including gladiatorial games. You also know that the costs of refurbishing an amphitheatre and the costs of gladiatorial games were undertaken by politicians, yet again. Last week you had an inscription, which I might have here. No, I don't. Okay, last week you had an inscription, and it was an inscription from Pompeii, obviously, because it's Pompeii where the amphitheatre is. It was an inscription by a duumvir who had held several rounds of gladiatorial games. He'd been duumvir 3 times, quinquennale once, and he'd held 3 rounds of gladiatorial games each time he was duumvir. And he spent quite a bit of money because he had fighters, boxers, musical entertainment, and he also had, yes, bullfighters. I think I remember bullfighters from that one. So he was paying for pairs of athletes for bullfighters. Now, if you get that inscription as part of, as a source, and then you're asked to write about the leisure activities of Pompeii, then you'll know that's linked to the amphitheatre, and if it asks for other knowledge, then you can refer also to the theatre, to the Odeon, and to a number of other types of entertainment that we'll come to in a moment. So, okay, this amphitheatre was a regional one that could hold up to 20,000 people, and there were regular shows because each year there are going to be elections, and so each year the newly elected aedili and duumvirs will put on games. What else can we say for this? Every time there was a Roman holiday, it was free entertainment for the population of the towns and the neighbouring towns. Now, there is a fresco here which shows a riot at the Pompeii Amphitheatre. So there's that double staircase up, and this riot, and these, you won't see them very well, but there's lots and lots of fighting. Look, it's like those drunken brawls that you read about or used to read about in King's Cross that have now moved into some of the other parts of Sydney. And this riot broke out between the audience who were from Pompeii and the audience from a nearby town called Mercuria. And it seems that they were backing different gladiators and then became agitated, and the brawl spilled out onto the nearby streets, as you can see. So, That was in 59 AD, and as a result, games were banned for some time. There's lots of evidence of the gladiatorial games. Here is some of that graffiti. And the graffiti here includes an image of the gladiator and his name, and he is being promoted here as a really good gladiator to watch. Here's a helmet. A number of these helmets were found in like a palestra near the theatre of Pompeii. So down a few blocks from the amphitheatre. And it's assumed that this exercise yard had been transformed into a training ground for the gladiatorial combatants, because a number of gladiatorial bits of gladiatorial equipment were found in the rooms bordering part of the exercise yard. Let's see what else I've got to say. So that was the barracks for the gladiators in the exercise yard near the theatre, and the equipment was found there. Daggers were found there as well. All right, we've got inscriptions, we've got graffiti. Oh, and this image here is from a tomb which contained images of gladiatorial games, and you saw already one of those images in an earlier, geez, where is it? Here. So the tomb actually contained some images of gladiators preparing for combat. And here is another image from that tomb. Well, what else? The palestra. So a palestra is a Greek concept, but it's an exercise yard. So now you can see what I mean. It's got some rooms at one end, and then it's got usually a portico all the way around. So a veranda all the way around. So it's an open area. It may have a swimming pool in it, and this one does. This great palestra at Pompeii does. You can just see it here. And this is where men would go to exercise, do athletics, do gymnastics, you know, chill out. This is their leisure activity, particularly for the elite classes in the towns, and the same with Herculaneum on a smaller scale. But all citizen men can exercise at the palestra. The palestra at Herculaneum is only partly excavated, so here are those rooms along the side. Here is the swimming pool, and the rest of the yard is still underneath that 22 metres of material, and there's just a tunnel into it to show that in the middle of the palestra there was actually a lovely fountain. So now we have the formal leisure activities, the public buildings. You've got the theatre, the Odeon, the amphitheatre, and the palestras. Know something a little bit. Look, that's only a few sentences each that you've copied for those public buildings. Now, let's have a look at some of the other leisure activities that happened in the towns, quite apart from in the town-supplied public buildings. So in the towns, there were inns, taverns. And in those taverns, as is in hotels now, there's drinking, gambling, socialising. In addition, Pompeii, and presumably Herculaneum too, had a strong brothel industry, because the Romans didn't frown on brothels. So let's have a look at the drinking. So a tavern, also called a capona, but a tavern will do. And on your screen you can see one in Herculaneum. It's a wine shop, but it also had drinking tables, tables for socialising. And on the wall, on the wall here, there's the different prices for the different qualities of wines. So you can get a cheap drink for 1 coin, a better drink for 2, and the really top quality wine you can get for 4 coins. It's a very popular leisure activity, the taverns, And here from a fresco, you can see 4 men, and last week I showed you this one. I said, you know, you really can't tell whether these are free men or freed men, freeborn men or free men, because they're wearing the same kind of tunic. But these guys are gambling. And this is actually part of a series. It's this colour rather than this lighter colour, but here's some of the other parts of the series. Now, what's happening here is that one of a man in a tavern is picking up a prostitute or an entertainment lady of some kind. Here are some of the dice that were used for gambling in the taverns. Here are some guys just having a quiet drink. Here are some other guys having a gamble. So these 4 frescoes from a tavern show the kinds of activities that were going on in the taverns in both towns. Wine bars and taverns were in both towns, so I showed you the tavern, the previous one, the tavern from Herculaneum with the prices. Well, of course you're going to expect wine bars in Herculaneum. It's a resort town. And wine bars in Pompeii, because this is where the working men and also the elite men are going to go for their leisure activity in everyday life. What else could we say? I think you should write down the name, or should know, that one of the popular wine bars in Pompeii was the wine bar of Aselina. Aselina. Now, as you have probably gone, oh, a woman. Yes. So a woman could own a commercial establishment. And Aselina's graffiti on Aselina's wall we had last week as well, where Aselina's girls, Aselina's serving girls, were promoting a couple of duumvir. I've got it here. Cassius, Lollius, Fustus, duumvir, for looking after the roads and the sacred and public buildings. So obviously that's the aedile. Aselina's girls ask you. So, also, I'll tell you where else there's a picture of fresco of drinking in a wine bar. The house of the Vetti brothers, who were freed men, ex-slaves, but very prosperous. So they had a really up to the minute state-of-the-art house, and they had those 4th style fantastical type frescoes that combine the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd. And along the bottom of the fresco on one wall is a frieze showing all kinds of activities that happened in Pompeii, including metalwork and pottery workers. But one part is about drinking wine. And so that little wall painting is rather cute, because they're little angel figures, but they're showing everyday life. Now, the last of the, actually, add in as well cockfighting, even though it's not on here. There's a mosaic that shows cockfighting as a gambling sport. Now, the last thing we have is brothels, and I have left off the slide of brothels. Damn. All right. Well, let's have a look at the brothels, just very quickly. It should come up. Yes, here it comes. So, brothels. Now, prostitution was a business, so it had to be registered with the town council, with the aediles, and no stigma attached. And so what you have is explicit graffiti on walls. For example, some of the street signs, and I don't remember if I showed you last year, but some of the street signs would have a penis on them, and or in the street itself, in the stone, etched on the stone itself, at the entrance to the street would be a penis, and that indicated that in that street there was a brothel. Now, the brothel could be a large business, and there was one very large brothel in Pompeii, but it could also be very small independent prostitutes. And they were operating out of some of the back streets of Pompeii, where wealthy houses had across the whole insula, and at the very back they might have a room or two which the prostitutes then rented. And so, you know, the wealthy house was getting income from renting out. Well, there's a quite lovely inscription from Herculaneum too, right next to, on the wall of the suburban baths. That's the baths, sorry, not the suburban baths. Yes, the marine baths. The baths that are right down on the waterfront. And it says something like, oh, hang on, I might have it here. And I do. Oh, this is not the one I'm thinking of. There's one, apart from this one I've just highlighted, which says, we recommend whatever her name is. She's a good lay. That's translated from slang in Roman. And here you've got one. Two friends were here. While they had bad service in every way from a guy named Epaphroditus. So this is at an inn right next to the baths. They threw him out and spent 105.5 sestertii, most agreeably, on whores. So even in the past, you've got tweets. All right, so now the brothels. I wanted you to see the brothel of Pompeii. So it's coming up on your screen now. It was two-story. It had a number of little cubicles. The bed for the prostitutes in the cubicles was actually made of concrete. So it's a bed shape, but actually made of concrete, so it wasn't comfortable. High up on the walls of the entry to this brothel, there were erotic frescoes. Actually, I think I have a picture of them here. So these are censored, but I think you're all 18 or thereabouts now. So there they are. And, that image here from that inn, that tavern, here again is a guy who's just picked up a prostitute, as I said before. So that will do that part. Now let's have a look at the food. I think that's the next one. Everyday life food. Well, here we come to a very strong point of this region, that because of the natural resources, the people of Pompeii and Herculaneum, as you know also from the evidence of the skeletons, had a very good diet, and the skeletal evidence now indicates that not only freemen and freedmen had a good diet, but the slaves were also well looked after. So an excellent area for agricultural production. What's the evidence of food? Well, here we've got the evidence. Here is a pig. So let's write some of the evidence. This is a cast of a pig from a farm. And the farm was a large farm, so a wealthy man's farm. And it was called, it's the same kind of farm. A number of these types of farms occurred in the Pompeii area, and they're called villas, even though a villa is actually a much nicer building. They're called villa rustica. So this cast here comes from the villa rustica at Boscoriali, and you're going to strike the villas, the three kinds of villas later, so just make a note. Villa rustica, Boscoriali. Now you can also see that in some of the ruins of the houses, okay, the remains, the calcified remains of food, pomegranates are a fruit, eggs, and obviously Jastrzemski, whom you've struck in the archaeology centre, the section rather, she's worked out what types of grapes were grown, and the grapes that you can see here have been replanted in the Villa Rustica at Boscoriali. Next to it there is a museum that contains some of these food items. Here, from a bakery in Pompeii are the carbonized remains of bread. That's the typical Pompeian bread, also shown in that fresco of the politician handing out bread that we had last week. A number of different carbonized grains have been found in Pompeii, wheat, barley, as two examples. So they've got a number of grain crops. They've got which then are transformed into bread, standard Pompeian bread. They've got a number of fruit crops. We've got the grapes, usually for wine. You've got the pomegranates, you've got the lemons, almonds, melons, cherries, and you've got vegetables like cabbages. Olive oil, of course, as well. Olive trees as well. Now, some of that food production happened inside the town, but this particular food production here was well and truly outside of the town of Pompeii. It's called garum. It's a fish paste, and apparently it was particularly vile smelling. So garum production happened outside of the walls of Pompeii, well and truly. I hope you're getting the idea of a really varied diet. What else have we got for evidence? Now, because large houses had a kitchen. So here's the kitchen at Oplontis. Here's the kitchen of the house of the Vetti. And what you're looking at is the stove in the kitchen. And it would also have a small oven, like a pizza oven. But most houses, here's a kitchen from this is the Villa of the Mysteries, which is this is actually from an ordinary house that happened to have a kitchen, which is unusual. And I took this because the kitchen was right next door to the toilet. And it wasn't really all that hygienic. But most people relied on commercial enterprises for their cooked food. So Pompeii and Herculaneum both had a large number of bakeries relative to their population, and this is what a bakery looks like. Now most bakeries had the grinders. What you're looking at here is the base of a grinder, and then what I've put the X over here fitted over the top. So you've got to imagine it fitting over the top of the base. In the top, the grain was poured. Slaves or donkeys turned that top cap around so that it ground against the bottom. This is concrete. And that turned the grain into flour. So that's why the flour had little bits of concrete, not discernible with the eyes in them. So a lot of bakeries. The other source of hot food was a thermopolia. So you need to think thermometer, hot. A hot food bar. A thermopolium is one. Thermopolia is a number of them. And both Pompeii and Herculaneum had a number of thermopolia relative to their population, because it was common practice for people to buy their main hot food meal of the day from the thermopolia. They might have seating, they might not. These, don't write this ever in an answer, but this is like having McDonald's, Kentucky Fried, restaurants, cheap everyday restaurants, cafes around. This is because a lot of houses didn't have kitchens. So they're going to get their hot food meal of the day from the thermopolia. Now you can see that they've got these big vats, great big pottery vats sunken into the counter. And these vats are called doloi, D-O-L-O-I. And that's what the hot food was kept in. This one here is sometimes called, it's from Pompeii, it's sometimes called the thermopolium of the Lares, L-A-R-E-S, because it's got a little lararium fresco at one end of it. Now, a lararium is the gods of the household. So that brings good luck to this thermopolium. Let's have a look at, whoops. When I go back to that, I'm hoping that you have all made a note about the thermopolium, so we're right on that point. Hot food bars, what else can I say? Oh, we've already dealt with the wine bars, the wine bar of Asolina as an example, but you can write the wine bars in as well, the taverns for wine in here as well. What sort of eating vessels do rich people have? Well, here is an entire silverware set from the House of Menander in Pompeii, and a similar set was found in a villa rustica belonging to a banker who had his main house in town, and it appears that because of all of the eruptions that were happening, the earthquakes rather, that were happening prior to the eruption, he must have sussed that something was going to happen, and so he stored his silverware in his villa rustica. It's called the Villa Rustica of the banker Jucundus, J-U-C-U-N-D-U-S. And obviously that's his farmhouse, massive farm enterprise outside of town. He lived in town. He didn't sleep in his Villa Rustica, but his workmen did. Not, by the way, in bedrooms, but in a loft. Here are some of the cooking utensils that are found in the wealthier houses. I just want to check the website page for a moment, guys, and see if I've left out anything. We've got the wide range of foods, known because of those carbonized remains. So your basic grains, barley, wheat, nuts like walnuts and almonds, fruits, we had fig, grape, pear, pomegranate, vegetables, cabbage, peas, lentils. Oh, we've had all of these. Now, one of the reasons that you can write that the population of all social classes had a good diet is because that was a result of the analysis of the skeletal remains. But also you can write that the sewage line from Herculaneum, which ran beside a tenement house, that is the poorest level of housing, that sewage contained evidence of a wide diet for those poor people, including fish bones, and then all of the nuts and the fruits that I've already read out to you. One of the things that sometimes comes up is the Latin name for the bakery. So just write down P-I-S-T-R-I-N-A, but you don't have to write that, just recognise it as a bakery. Usually you'll know it because it's got the grinders and it's got the ovens, like the pizza ovens. Let me see. Oh, frescoes have got like fruit bowl and vineyards and so on them as well. We've done the cooking, we've done the dining. Oh no, we haven't finished the dining. I hope, and I didn't have it, so I need to go back to the main page for a minute, guys. The trouble is I changed the PowerPoint around and I've accidentally left some slides out. Now, when we do houses, you're going to find that if in the large houses there is a dining room, in the poorer people's houses, in the tenement houses, no, they've just got basically sleeping quarters and possibly a front room that is the pottery workshop or the thermopolium or whatever. But in the large houses, they have a dining room, and the dining room is called a triclinium. So it's here, I'll just highlight it, the triclinium. Now, a triclinium is generally small, and it's called a triclinium, and you had this last week because it's got 3 sides of the 4 sides have got a couch on them. So to incline is to lie down, tri is 3, so triclinium means lying down on 3 couches. So they're going to be kind of reclining, not flat, but on the elbow to eat. Although this fresco down the bottom here, which shows some slaves serving in a triclinium, most of these people are sitting up. So a triclinium is a room with 3 couches, a dining room. Some very big houses, and this is the house of Julia Felix, had an outdoors triclinium made of concrete. This is the house of Julia Felix from Pompeii. You saw her advertisement last week in the graffiti. She wasn't just an elite woman, she was a businesswoman renting out part of her house, including her private baths. In Herculaneum, there's also a lovely house, the House of Neptune, and it has a little fountain with Neptune and Aphrodite on it, but it also has next to that an outdoor concrete triclinium with a little water feature at one end. Let me see. We've seen the wealthy silver services, and the fresco that's coming up on your screen now is actually from a tomb as well, outside the Herculaneum gate, and it shows a range of silver vessels for eating, and it also has in it some glass, fine glassware as well. So that will do us for food and dining. You can see it doesn't take very long to do this stuff. Clothing. Well, the clothing for men, the basic clothing for all men is a tunic underneath. And so the workmen and the slaves and the freedmen, freeborn men, freedmen and slaves, all just wear regular working clothes of a basic tunic. But the elite men, over the top of that, as you can see here on this fresco and also here on this statue of an elite man, they wore a toga. These are all made of wool, by the way. Now the toga is costly and difficult to wear, but it gives the man a very stately, wealthy look. And so you saw that statue of Marcus Nonius Balbus from Herculaneum, and he had a toga on. And this is just an anonymous man, because in some of the houses they had statues of the head of the household wearing a toga. Now the highest level of important men, you know, those duumvir, they could have a purple stripe along the edges of their toga. The ordinary blokes who were elite, they couldn't wear the purple stripe. So the purple stripe indicated a higher rank. What about the women? Well, the women, they wore, I wonder if I could put the women on. The women, the working women, the ordinary working women are just going to wear a long shift, and a long tunic. The elite women, again, they had layered clothing. So, oops, I've lost you. So their basic tunic was 2 kinds. They could wear a kind of tunic influenced by the Greeks. So a tunic is just underneath these cloak things that you can see here. There's a straight shift, it's made of wool, it drapes down from the shoulders where it's pinned, and then what they do to it determines the style. So one style is a very straight peplos style, and the other style is much more popular. It's got lots and lots and lots of gathers. You can just see the gathers here, and it's called a chiton, C-H-I-T-O-N. So that's two pieces of fabric pinned together, draped down, then there's a belt, and that gathers it in, and it's kind of also looped over the belt, so that it's got like a blousey effect. So just write a chiton or chiton. Now, over the top of that, they will wear a cloak. And respectable women always wore a long cloak, and that's called a palla. And they also wear it over the top of their head when they're outdoors. So, what else do they have? They've got the tunic. The name for that long tunic that's worn either in the chiton style also is a stola, S-T-O-L-A. Sometimes they've got three layers. They've got an underlayer which is the stola, which is just the straight tunic. They've got an overlayer, which is the gathered chiton, and then they've got the third layer, which is this long cloak, the palla, P-A-L-L-A. So elite women were expected to really wear a substantial amount of clothing compared to the working women. These women are also going to wear jewellery, so a large number of pieces of jewellery, pearl and emerald necklaces, gold rings have been found. And as far as hairstyle goes, guys, remember that those two frescoes I showed you, the fresco of the guy who was first interpreted to be the lawyer, but then it turned out that he was the Samnite baker and his wife, and then the fresco of Sappho, who was an elegant woman. And you saw that those women had curled hair and then held in a net headpiece, which is rather nice. So that's it for the women and the clothing. Not much to remember, so let's go back over it again. The men, the basic clothing for all men was a tunic. The working men, and all that is a shift that then has a belt, a rope or belt around the waist. For working men of all kinds, slaves, freedmen, free men, here you can see it's a shorter tunic, end of story. But for elite men, the tunic, which could be a very long tunic, was covered with a toga. And for the most important men, the toga had a purple stripe. The women, on the other hand, the working women, again, were just going to wear the very long shift, the long tunic. We used to call our school uniforms tunics. And that's it for the working women. But for the elite women, they would have the tunic, then over the top of that, they could have that very highly gathered Greek-style chiton, C-H-I-T-O-N, which has got, it's been gathered at the waist. You can't see it underneath this, but it's got a waist and then ballooned up over the waist, and then over the top of that, they had to wear the palla, this very long cloak. Now, is that it for today? No, it's not. I've still got to do, and I'm looking at the time, and we're going to be able to do it. Let's have a look at that health again, just a refresher on the health. The population of Pompeii was very reasonably healthy, and the more recent evidence says that they were very healthy. There's a good sample of the population, and don't go to the plaster cast for this, go to, the samples include the skeletal remains from the Sarno baths that Estelle Laser researched, and more recently the skeletal remains from Herculaneum. And those remains indicated that the diet was a good diet. Plenty of seafood, plenty of vegetables, these people had a regular diet. The thermopolia worked well for both towns. And so, if I just go down, oops, no, I didn't. And so, rather than slaves being neglected, the evidence is that slaves were also well looked after in terms of food. Estelle Laser found, rather surprisingly, if I go back to Estelle Laser for a minute, Estelle Laser found that there were a number of skeletal remains of postmenopausal women, and she identified them as postmenopausal because of some of the bone issues that they had, kind of like osteoporosis type bone issues, and that told her that the women also had a good diet for this number of women to actually survive into postmenopausal ages. The same, she found that there was evidence of arthritic deterioration in some of the men. Again, that indicated that these were older men. So she deduced that in Pompeii and Herculaneum, in Pompeii that she was looking at, and now in Herculaneum because of the Herculaneum skeletons, that that the diet was so good that a proportion of the population lived into postmenopausal ages, which means 60, 65. What else do we have? You will also write about the use of modern technology, DNA analysis, and also MRI scans of these skeletal remains when you're doing the section that you're going to do for this week's essay, which is about the ethics of archaeology, the study and display of human remains. Separate study from display. I sent you a link to a new article about a new display in the amphitheatre of Pompeii, because that's such a big public area, and there's that pyramid display building being erected. It's temporary in that amphitheatre to display the human remains, the casts, not the skeletons. The second piece of up-to-date information about the display of human remains is the choice by the Superintendenza, by the Italian authorities, to not yet open the display of human remains in the boat sheds of Herculaneum, and instead to reconstruct a boat shed in the Museum of Naples with a display of the skeletal remains from that boat shed, but with information plaques, so that the emphasis is on knowledge and understanding rather than on titillation. And that's a contrast to the display of casts in the Marcellum in Pompeii. So both recent displays have taken note of the criticisms of the display of human remains simply for sensationalism. So you can make a note of those two recent changes. Now, at this stage, I'm going to just make a comment about the baths, and I really need to upload. If you bear with me, I need to upload another PowerPoint on the baths, and it wouldn't fit because the pictures were too big. But I think I'll be able to do it if I just delete a few pages here. So I'm going to delete. Sorry guys, bear with me. The pages are disappearing. We're going backwards. So, water supply. Put a heading, water supply, and while I'm doing this, we may as well start. So, with the water supply, we're going to have several headings. You're going to have the actual supply of water and how that water came into the towns. 2, you're going to have the town baths. And 3, you're going to have the toilets and sewerage. So 3 components to that part of everyday life, and then we will have finished everyday life. So I'm just going to try loading some content now and see if I can see if it'll come up. Deary. I might only get water and sanitation up. And I love the baths, but I can always do the baths just with notes, and you just take the notes and you can look at the pictures later. So here should come in a moment. I'm not sure how many slides are in this. Oh, it's only 22 slides. It should come up all right. Almost there. Lots of pictures. Oh, I should pause record. Oh well. And away we go. So, water supply and sanitation first. Now, the water supply comes in by aqueduct. So here we, oh no, we don't want that. Our Augustus was actually responsible for improving the water supply of the Naples region, because ages before, remember he died in 14 AD, and we're looking at the region in 79 AD. So Augustus had improved the aqueducts carrying water into Rome, but also into some regional centres. And the main aqueduct, the Aqua Serenum, ran, which was Augustus's aqueduct, ran north of Pompeii, and a branch came off it to Pompeii. So Pompeii had a regular water supply brought in by aqueduct. See, originally both these towns had to have wells. Pompeii did have a river by it, Herculaneum didn't, so Herculaneum's houses all had a well, and rainwater came into the impluvium in the atrium of the house, and then it was carried by pipe into a well, because that was their water supply. But once the aqueduct was built, they didn't need the wells. So in Pompeii, the branch from the Serenum Aqueduct, and you don't need to remember the name of it, just know that an aqueduct brought water into the town, and then eventually an extension actually brought water to Herculaneum, so Herculaneum didn't need the wells. So you're going to write originally wells, however by 79 AD there was a long-standing water supply by aqueduct. Now, when water comes in by aqueduct, it's running mainly underground, so here is part of that aqueduct running underground. And you're used to seeing the aqueducts running overground because they're crossing valleys. But mostly they're underground, and they have the inspection openings into the surface. Now, as they run underground, also, wherever they come above ground, they're going to get leaves and crud in them, litter in them. Now have a look at this image of the aqueduct channel before it reached Pompeii, and you can see that a man can crawl in there and inspect it and clean it out. You can also see it's using the arch, it's using concrete. So I'll just show you one of the wells of Herculaneum originally. Now, once the water reached the town, what it had to do is to be cleaned out, and it also had to be distributed to the main destinations in the town. And there are 3 destinations. There's the town street fountains. So most houses don't have a water supply. So that means that each day, to get the drinking water, they're going to send a slave, or if they haven't got slaves, the woman of the house is going to go to the drinking fountain with a container and get it from the street fountain. So that is the most important part of the water supply, is the drinking water at the street fountains. Now, the second destination for the water is businesses, and that's businesses like the bakery is going to need water, especially the Philonica, the wool dyeing business is going to need water. And the third destination is the least important in terms of priority, and that's the wealthy houses. So wealthy houses had piped water. Now, when the water gets into the town, it has to be cleaned and distributed. So what you're looking at here is a building called a castellum. You can see the name up the top there, a castellum. The castellum of Herculaneum hasn't been found, but Herculaneum must have had a castellum, which is a water dividing building. So inside here, the water comes in underground into the castellum. So now it's above the surface in the channel. And there's a guy in there standing cleaning it. So I'll just bring up the guy cleaning it. So here he is, see? Nice little picture, well drawn. And he's raking out leaves and things. Now, what happens after he's done that, that water keeps on flowing into a distribution mechanism. So the main pipe is the pipe which then runs under the footpaths, and so it's going to have separate divisions coming off it, all through the town. So the castellum's at the highest part of town, as you can see here. Okay, the slope's going down. And out of this main little hole here, I should use red so you can see it, out of this main little hole here is the main water supply going to all of those fountains. And the two others are for the town businesses and for the private houses. So they've separated the water supply. And that's so that in times of emergency, of low flow, they can shut off, as you can see in this diagram, the second and third priority water destinations. This is a slide showing you from inside the castellum the three holes that can be shut off. You can see this is the town water supply. Right, so it flows out of the castellum. It flows down slope. But as it's flowing down slope, it loses momentum. And so to give it more momentum, there are water towers. Now, the cover's gone off, but this used to have pipes running down it. So the water is flowing down, and there's enough to make it go up to the top of this. And then as it goes down, of course, it's getting momentum again, velocity, and away it will go underground. Part of the water will be siphoned off. The rest will go under this fountain and under the footpath and keep on going. So you're going to expect a streetscape to contain every now and then again a water tower, and more frequently the public fountains. So the public fountains are really important because they're the main water supply, and the public fountains are being found in the streets of Herculaneum. Well, there's one from near the Forum of Herculaneum, and lots of them are being found in Pompeii. In addition, you can see here some lead pipes. So the pipes, the water pipes, the big and small water pipes were made of lead. You can see that they're in different dimensions. The big one is the one that's going to the fountains. The little one here is the one that's going to private houses. Here is a massive pipeline, public pipeline near the Theatre of Pompeii. What have we got? I wanted you to see, so wealthy houses had water piped in, and they wanted that. Here is that lovely fountain, a lovely fountain from the House of the Mosaic fountain in Pompeii. There's a similar fountain from the House of Neptune in Herculaneum. This was part of a really long, a fountain feature in a really long pool in the House of Octavius Quarto in Pompeii. These private houses also had swimming pools, so the water filled the swimming pools. So you can see that is going to be cut off ahead of the businesses and the drinking water. There's a priority. Sanitation, before we get on to baths, and I may leave baths and do them in a separate little one after. Sanitation, so sewage, toilets. Now I did show you a house that had a toilet in it. It had a single toilet. It was a poor person's house. Most of those poor people, or working class people's houses, didn't have toilets. Larger houses actually had their own set of toilets that would have, say, 3 or 4 in the one room. But the town of Pompeii, and presumably the town of Herculaneum, provided public toilets. Now this is all that's left of the public latrine near the Forum of Pompeii. But what was on here originally, resting on here, was the seats. And in the seats there were the little holes, okay, for you to sit on to go to the toilet. So you've got to imagine people sitting on seats and having a conversation all the way around here. Now in the centre, what's missing is the pool, the running water, because there was running water. Oh, well, it's a little bit further out. And that was picking up all of this sewage and taking it to the latrine drain. But these people could actually get a sponge. If you can imagine a bit of a stick with a sponge on the end, and they could sponge themselves clean if they needed to. So that's a public latrine. It had, there were sewer lines, and in Herculaneum, the sewer line actually ran under the street, because remember, Herculaneum's a clean town, but you know that house that I showed you, which had a toilet, here's the toilet and here's the kitchen, that house, the sewage for that just ran out into the street in a pipeline that picked up water from upstairs, picked up the sewage and then carried it under the floor and out to the street. There's a drain here from the upper floor, and it possibly used the water from the upper floor to flush it. Here's one of those little house toilets and a reconstruction of one, but the bigger villas, the marine villas, they had like a toilet that could hold 5-6 people, a private toilet. I did have one other thing to show you, but it's not on here. All right, listen guys, for everyday life and leisure activities, you've got your leisure activities, you've got your food and dining, you've got your clothing, you've got your health, and you haven't got the baths. So I'm going to just dictate some notes about the baths, and possibly bring up just some photos straight from the website. Now, baths are not like what we think of baths. The public baths were a sanitation measure firstly and a social measure secondly. So the town, both towns, provided more than one set of public baths for their population. And they had separate women's and men's bathing quarters, with one exception in Herculaneum, which I'll come to later. So in Pompeii, there was a set of baths near the Forum, so we're going to call them the Forum baths. And there was another bigger establishment a few streets away in the street that leads to the gate of Stabii, so they're called the Stabian, S-T-A-B-I-A-N baths. Now both of those baths were in the town of Pompeii, but just outside the walls of Pompeii, a third new baths were being built, which are proof of the prosperity, of Pompeii. In Herculaneum, which had only been partially excavated, 2 baths have already been found in that partial excavation. So one of the baths is is a few streets away from the marine, from the coast, from the marine waterfront. And so it's sometimes called the town baths, or even again forum baths, or even suburban baths. And the other bath is right on the waterfront, so it's called the marine baths. The marine baths is slightly different to the other baths because it only has one set of bathing rooms. And therefore it's thought that the bathing in that bath for men and women was timed. So there was a set period set aside for the men to attend and a set period for the women. All the other baths had a set of rooms for the men and a set of rooms for the women. So let's have a look at this diagram and look at the set of rooms. All right, the women are just going to have the plain rooms, but the men, as you can see on this picture, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. I think I can make it bigger. No, I can't. Yes, I can. I'm hoping that that makes it bigger. Just let me have a check. Okay, the men have got a little palestra and a swimming pool in the outside of the baths. So you can see that where my pointer is pointing now, men exercising, and here's the swimming pool, the piscine. The men will come in and they'll exercise and possibly swim. Then what they do is come into the first room, which is the change room. Once they've taken their clothes off, hung them up, possibly gotten a metal scraper to scrape their skin clean. So they've rubbed olive oil all over their skin, possibly with perfume, and then scraped it off to get any dirt off. Then they will go into the tepidarium. Now, tepid water is warmish water, so tepidarium. And the tepidarium was to get them warmed up a little bit. And once they were warmed up, then they would go into the caldarium. And the caldarium is this pool right at the end here is very, very hot water. So a caldera, remember, a volcanic caldera is called a caldera because it's hot. Scalding yourself is scalding yourself. So this is a caldarium. You'll remember it because you'll scald yourself. A caldarium. And they hop into the caldarium and then periodically, because, you know, the temperature's rising and getting red face, they'll run over here to a pool of clear water and splash it on their face and then pop back in. Of course, there's a lot of steam in this room. You can see a couple of blokes here sitting. A fair bit of business was conducted while the men were conducting their daily health ritual. Once they've had enough of the caldarium, they go back into the tepidarium and then they plunge themselves into a very cold pool. That's a frigidarium. You're used to a refrigerator, so frigidarium. So the words for these rooms, girls, are not hard. Tepidarium, caldarium, frigidarium. Tepid water first, scalding water second, and frigid water last, cold water last. So that's the process, the bathing process. Now the women have got exactly the same, except they don't have the exercise yard. So over on their side, they've got a tepidarium, they've got a change area, then they've got a tepidarium, a caldarium, and a frigidarium. And I'll just again mention that the baths in Herculaneum on the waterfront, the marine baths, only had one set. Actually, they had an internal swimming pool, a really nice one. And then they had the tepidarium, caldarium, frigidarium. And so what you have there, though, is only one set of rooms, not a separate set for women. And that, I think, is all I need to tell you about this. Oh, except, of course, that, again, baths were maintained by politicians. They're public buildings as well. There's a lovely PowerPoint, guys, and a diagram of the baths, the forum baths, the stadium baths, and the town baths of Herculaneum and the marine baths of Herculaneum. It's well worth having a look at that and just adding a little bit, but really you've got the guts of it. And so I think that will do us for tonight. We didn't go too far over, only 15 minutes.